Welcome to today's Business and Finance webinar to mark the 2021 CFO 100 Index in association with CA Partners. As you'll know, the CFO 100 Index highlights the top financial talent in the country. We'll start off by hearing a partner address from David Cass, partner with CA Partners. This will be followed by a thought leadership panel discussion on the evolving role of the CFO and the importance of flexible business models and investment in technology in an unpredictable world. Our moderator for today's discussion is Cian O'Murchu, Head of Corporate Data Solutions at Deutsche Bank, and he'll be joined by some of Ireland's leading Chief Financial Officers selected from the index, which was launched today. To join the conversation, please use the hashtag CFO100. I'll hand you over now to David Cass, partner with CA Partners, who's going to deliver a partner address.
Thanks for that, Sarah. CA Partners are delighted to partner with Business and Finance on the CFO 100 Index for 2021. The CFO 100 Index celebrates CFOs who are constantly adapting, innovating, and evolving in their role through leading high-performance teams, developing and perfecting processes, transforming their organizations, and using innovative technologies to not only survive, but to succeed and thrive. The finance function has moved beyond the scorekeeper role of recording and reporting performance to becoming a true strategic partner, playing a key role in mitigating risk, driving strategy, and adding value. With this, the role of the CFO is becoming broader and ever more challenging, with the need to deliver consistent results in a fast-paced and uncertain global market. The ever-increasing turmoil in geopolitics, as well as events such as the financial crisis, Brexit, and the pandemic, have brought the CFO role and its challenges more to the fore, as organisations grapple with rapidly changing events and increased levels of uncertainty. The demands of stakeholders have shifted in this period too, with a much greater focus on ethical business practice, sustainability, and social responsibility. Coupled with this change is the rapid development and adoption of new technologies, transforming not only how and where we work, but also how our jobs and roles will evolve in the future. This landscape will be the new normal for finance operations for the foreseeable future, and companies that build flexibility and can adapt and innovate quickly are best placed to succeed. CA Partners Ireland plays a leading role, partnering with CFOs in this changing environment, and has been helping to reduce complexity, costs, and deliver innovative solutions in finance functions in Ireland and the UK for over 15 years. So how are CFOs adapting and responding to these challenges? We have seen that CFO priority has moved beyond efficiency challenges, like growing at scale and reducing cost, to more existential needs to redefine and rework core business models. In some cases, just to survive, and in others, to quickly benefit from new opportunities. Streamlined and cost-driven agendas have been replaced by strategies to enable maximum flexibility and agility. The CFO 100 Index launched today is made up of companies with diverse backgrounds, but these challenges are like a perfect storm, with no industry left untouched by change. However, the impacts and responses differ greatly between industry. We witnessed a number of impacts and different responses across our client base. In our retail customers, we saw the impact the Brexit vote and ensuing uncertainty brought. In response to this, we saw CFOs and finance functions react rapidly to assess and build flexibility into their global supply chains, often promoting projects that built flexible options over the most cost-effective solutions. When the pandemic hit, retailers needed to get online or optimize their online distribution capability. And in some cases, the preparation they were forced into through Brexit paid dividends here, enabling a more rapid response to online pressure. In the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, we saw and worked with finance functions on rapidly reassessing R&D investment decisions, a rationalisation of ongoing projects and programmes, and prioritising scaling up of production facilities that provided multiple options as solutions were being developed in parallel. In financial services and banking, we worked with organisations that were struggling with the challenges of standing up a remote workforce at short notice and supporting customers that were used to the retail experience in the move to online. We supported them in developing from legacy operations to digital ways of working and working through remote teams. Organisations accelerated the move to agile ways of working, releasing small changes often and testing the effects. Agribusiness organisations had to deal with increasing levels of demand. Traditional demand models and production schedules had to be quickly reassessed and streamlined to deliver the capacity required. Here too, there were significant changes to supply chains, particularly moving away from the UK as a land bridge to Europe. However, crisis and challenge provide opportunity to those that take them. Rapid change demands rapid action, and a multifaceted changing world enables strong companies to experiment and reinvent in ways they never would have conceived before. Risks need to be taken for opportunities to be realised, and we have seen this time and again with our clients over the past 2 years. After the initial shock of the first wave of the pandemic had worn off, we had expected new projects and activity to die down. Instead, activity intensified, not only to shore up or adapt areas of concern, but in the development of new products and services to take advantage of emerging opportunities. Agile methodology has come to the fore, and prototyping new products and implementing new ways of working in real time, which would never have been considered possible or practical in some industries, are now normal practice and are delivering real results. So what comes next in the new normal? These external challenges have been further compounded and complemented through a rapid advancement in technology and changes in employee and customer behaviour that is here to stay. These will impact future decisions in a multitude of ways. For example, in finance and business operations, the cost of labour is less of an influence now on where to locate finance centres. Availability of skilled people will be the key to these decisions. In the future, finance function teams will as easily come from tech and data background as from the accounting world, reflecting the growing influence of data and AI driving real-time decisions in the finance function. Agile is the new way of working, iterative changes and testing the results in real time. For offices and staff, new ways of working are here for the long term. We are now seeing many organisations strategising for the office of the future in how they will use, grow, or even dispose of office space. Staff retention and flexible working policies will be key to future success as the workforce becomes increasingly mobile. Stakeholders and customers in this environment are demanding more, not less, from businesses. Sustainability, ethical practices, and transparency have all moved centre stage in customer decisions to do business. Customer behaviour has gone through a generational shift. How people buy and consume services today is different to 2 years ago. Companies need to understand and plan to satisfy changing demands and to stay relevant. The ability to track and cost the carbon footprint of operations for statutory reporting is starting to become increasingly important as well. New and emerging technologies are growing in influence. Blockchain, cryptocurrencies, NFT, and virtual worlds such as the metaverse are becoming more mainstream. Customers will expect more and more products and services in this space. More traditional businesses are starting to develop services and products to compete with born-on-the-internet challengers. At CA Partners, we are a next-generation consulting firm and recognise the need to move to agile delivery and bring data and AI capability to the centre of our service from the beginning. We have invested in and grown 5 data and artificial intelligence centres of excellence globally. In delivering our service, we leverage this to bring a unique blend of digital, data, AI, and design capabilities, augmenting traditional consulting to deliver superior value and tangible results. We have also invested significantly in sustainability through our Consulting for Good programme that promotes projects positively impacting environmental, social and governance aims. The overall and underlying impact on CFOs through all of this is the constant need for flexibility, adaptability and versatility in operations. The shifting role of the CFO from scorekeeper to business partner has put them front and centre in driving strategy and enabling firms to benefit from new opportunities. So it is in this context that we celebrate CFOs and the role of the finance function in organisations through the CFO 100 Index. We are delighted to be a key sponsor of this event and wish to congratulate all CFOs who have made the list and have been honoured today. Today's panel discussion will develop these themes further, and we are very fortunate to have a strong panel who between them have over 20 years experience within the finance function across multiple sectors. Today on the panel we have Sarah Fitzpatrick, CFO of Houses of the Oireachtas, Emer Cahalan, CFO and co-founder of Vivid Edge, and Avril O'Hare, Director of Administration, CFO and Board Executive of Lidl Ireland. Over the next 35 minutes, they'll be giving us their insights into the role of a Chief Financial Officer and how it has changed and adapted over the past 2 years. I'll hand you back now to Sarah Freeman, Managing Editor of Business and Finance.
Thanks, David, for a really insightful address. I think that gives a great context for the panel discussion. I'd like to welcome now our moderator, Cian O'Murchu, Head of Corporate Data Solutions, Deutsche Bank.
Thank you, Sarah. For today's discussion, we'll focus on the evolving role of the CFO, the importance of flexible business models, and investment in technology in an unpredictable world, and we know it. We are very fortunate to have such a strong panel who between them have decades, I have to say, of experience in the financial sector. Over the next 30 minutes or so, they'll be giving us their insights into the role of the CFO and how it's changed and adapted over the past. By the end, hopefully all of you, our viewers, will be taking away one or two pieces of advice that you can incorporate into your own business. I'm delighted to be joined by our panel: Sarah Fitzpatrick, Chief Financial Officer, Houses of the Oireachtas; Emer Callan, Chief Financial Officer and co-founder of Vivid Edge; and Avril O'Hare, the Director of Administration, Chief Financial Officer and Board Executive at Lidl, notice the pronunciation, Ireland. Emer, would you mind kicking us off maybe with what are the key responsibilities of a CFO in 2021 and how has it changed over the recent times?
Well, I think it's expanded enormously. So I think maybe 10 years ago, the role of the CFO was very much focused on, financial reporting and controls. Whereas I think now it's much broader. It's into risk management. It's into decision support. So it's very much more, I think, a partnership role with the CFO rather than a guardianship role. The analogy that I use is that, in the past, it was very much about looking backwards, whereas now it's much more about being in the driving seat of a car where, the rear view mirror is a much smaller piece of the picture than the windscreen through which you're looking. So I think it's about, taking for granted nearly, and you talked about investing in digitization and in IT, and I think that's a very important part of it. I think it's very much about having that investment done to have the routine almost taken for granted, and then it can be actually a much more creative role.
And Avril, anything to add to that in your case? I think like one of the points is we've got a number of different perspectives here with the public and private sector. So very keen to get your perspective from your own organization as well in industry.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Emer is saying. So I think we hear a lot in these conferences about, moving from the typical finance expert onto the business partner, onto the strategic partner, which is where ideally the role should be in 2021, 2022, moving into the future. I would see it as very much a role that should be driving innovation and looking at the business model as a whole in a corporation and coming up with innovative ideas on how to drive the entire business model forward. And that's why I think within the CFO role, you're so well placed to have that neutral perspective of the business overview and being able to pinpoint opportunities for that business model to grow.
And talk a bit more about that neutral role. How is the CFO neutral and who are they bouncing off against in those type of situations?
Well, I suppose when I look at my own role as CFO in Middle Ireland and Northern Ireland, you can kind of look at it one way. I'm the only one that doesn't have skin in the game, so to speak. So you have your commercial director who will be looking after purchasing, and they will have a very targeted view there. You've got the operations director for us in a supermarket organization that will be looking at your stores and warehouses and how to progress that. Whereas your CFO in the middle, and they're looking at the finance, they're looking at the business models, and they're able to have that neutral perspective to say, okay, well, which is the correct strategy? Because at the end of the day, you are not as invested in regards to the decisions. Of course, invested in terms of the business results, absolutely. But whether it's growing one area at the expense of the other, that's something that the CFO should be able to balance and make sure that all areas are growing together to fulfill the business objective or the shareholders' objective.
And who just continuing on that theme, who would you say are then the key strategic partners or roles in the firm which then you're working with and potentially are working with you to ensure that their needs are actually met?
Well, I suppose in every organization it's probably quite similar. It's whoever your shareholders are. I work for a private company, so obviously my shareholder is the person who owns the company, but also your managing director or chairman of the board, so that you're able to be their number two in regards to giving them advice in how to grow the business forward to the interest of all stakeholders as well, not just the chairman that I've mentioned or shareholders, but also the wider community, especially when we talk about topics such as CSR and diversity, which are growing ever more in importance.
Excellent. And to try and sort of see the context between that's a private business in a specific sector, Sarah, being a CFO in the houses of the Oireachtas, could you give us just a bit of color around what that is as a role and you know, potentially how it differs in the public sector?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think a lot of what Emer and Avril have said actually resonate, even though it is the public sector rather than the private sector. I think additionally, though, there's kind of an increased need to understand the technology at CFO level, you know, to understand these are the tools. There are new and better tools available all the time, but it's understanding and challenging to match those with the business needs. So I think, you know, somebody could come along and demonstrate a tool for you and it's a fantastic tool, but does it actually do what you want it to do? And from the public sector perspective, that's arguably maybe more important because we have such regulation around how we procure those tools. I can't just go out and say, oh, that's an interesting tool, I think I will buy it and implement it. You know, I just make my business case. There's much more restriction about how we might procure those, rightly so. But, you know, the reality of it is that it means that it takes us a little longer sometimes to work some of those tools into our strategy. I heard an expression somewhere quite recently where they said the procurement function commits the funding, but the finance function has to explain it. And I think that is, from a public sector perspective, it's probably the same actually, in fairness, in the private sector, but certainly from our perspective, we need to be very, very careful about that. So I think in terms of the role itself, be you in the private sector or be you in the public sector, I spent some time in the private sector before I moved into the civil service. And I think there's an awful lot in common. I think the changing role has been across the board. I don't think it matters whether you're in the private sector or the public sector. And I think Emer and Avril have both touched on that. It has changed in the last 10 years and probably will continue to change now apace as we move out of, and I hate to say it because we're all fed up hearing it, but in what will hopefully be a post-COVID world, the pace of the digital transformation that we've all experienced has jumped forward. Again, I read somewhere in another article recently that the impact of COVID was that it jumped our digital transformation forward about 3 years more quickly than it would have otherwise, because we all had to change. We had no choice. We had to just pivot to a remote working model. We had to pivot to taking some of the much loved paper out of our function and having people work in a much more virtual way. Even the conversation that we're having now over Zoom, and the conversation is, well, are we going to use Zoom, or are we going to use Teams, or are we going to use whatever other piece of software there is? So I think they're complementary. I think there's a lot to learn from both sides, be you public sector or private sector. I think I learn an awful lot from listening to CFOs in the private sector. And I'd like to think that sometimes I have something to add to those working in the private sector that they wouldn't have considered.
Absolutely. And just sticking with your post-COVID comment, could you describe maybe what how you supported the organization in the last 2 years? I know you've mentioned things like working from home and moving off paper, but specifically around, you know, as a CFO, what type of things did you need to do to support the organization that were new and different?
I mean, a lot of it, and it's probably no different than yourselves, but a lot of it was supporting the staff. Like a huge part of the changes that we've made in the last 2 years during COVID were about staff change management, because, you know, the teams, all of the teams, I have salaries, procurement and finance are the functions that report to me. And those teams have been in effectively a continuous period of change for the last 2 years. They've been adapting, delivering new solutions. There's always a concern around the risk of burnout there. And it's much more important now, I think, than ever to try and prioritize some of the time and some of the energy that your staff spend. So I know myself, I am not a techie, as I am fond of telling people, but I have had to kind of really put that aside and learn from our tech. We're very lucky. We have very good tech guys in the Oireachtas, and just to listen to them and understand what it is that they're trying to do and try and support them with a finance mind as best I can, try and ensure that they have the budget that they require in order to achieve everything that needs to be achieved. Because I think we've made so many changes to now, but there are further changes to be made, be that telephony work. You know, I think the days where we had a phone sitting on a desk in work is probably long gone. I know my desk phone has been forwarded to my mobile for the guts of 2 years now. Yes. And I think we can do better. And I know that our tech guys can do better. And I think my role in that is really just to support them and ensure that they have that finance mind on those committees and on those project boards where we're discussing that.
Yeah, I think signs on the fact that the transition has worked so well. It has, the support has been there, and the technology has been invested in correctly. Avril, from your perspective, I mean, I suppose the food industry was at the forefront of the crisis as well, and a lot of issues around both supply, cost, furlough staff. Maybe you could describe in terms of your role within Lidl, how the CFO role supported during COVID, and what changed again, specifically to accommodate what was happening.
I think during COVID, yeah, it was obviously for retail a huge transition, particularly since all of our colleagues stayed working, in the front, in the supermarkets and the warehouses. And the demand for food obviously went through the roof, particularly at the start of the stockpiling. As soon as it was announced that the schools were closing, I think everyone, although we thought the schools might close in that initial period in the March when it started, and we were all a little bit shocked and taken by surprise. We had to really look at our business model and react extremely fast to what was going on in the market. So I suppose going back to the comment about the CFO role and that part of the organisation being the neutral person or the business partner to the organisation, we actually set up the crisis management team within our organisation, and we're responsible for that. So previously, we would have done quite a lot of crisis simulations within our organisation with crisis management consulting firms. When things happen, how do you react as a business? And I think that's such a necessary best practice to do within our organisation. Now, we never had practiced what happens when there's a pandemic, but it did actually bring us together and solidify in our minds the first thing we would need is a group of people within our organisation who could react very fastly in regards to what we were doing. In regards to how it affected particularly the role of my role, I'm over the finance side, but also obviously the IT side. And from the IT side, exactly like Sarah said, the guys were amazing in our IT, that like overnight, suddenly we were working from home. We didn't have a working from home model in our head office previously. So that was something new for us. We had to try and find laptops from absolutely everywhere to get everyone at home, because obviously from the finance perspective, we have a huge responsibility to our suppliers. So we had suppliers who were having difficulty getting paid from other organisations, and also suppliers who no longer potentially had other organisations to supply. So it was really important that we were able to support our strategic suppliers by, number one, paying them early, seeing did they have liquidity, because at the end of the day, those suppliers are, essential to what we do as a business. So it was that really close partnership role that we played with the suppliers. And also, we did different things like we started listing artisan cheese. So, we had suppliers who supplied artisan cheese to restaurants that were potentially closed, who came to us to say, we don't have anyone to supply anymore,
right,
or with that area of our business. Plastic organisations like Cork Gin Maker, who made us the sanitising gel. So we went to them and said, can't get sanitising gel. And they were like, well, we make gin. Well, we'll make sanitising gel for you. And we had that turned around within a few weeks, that we were able to get them to work with us and be able to turn the product around in a few weeks. I suppose what also was quite challenging during that time is what you mentioned, is the amount we had to invest in the safety measures, which was a huge capital investment. And also we didn't really know, were we 100% going in the right direction? Because obviously, say for example, when we procured masks for our employees, at the time government advice was still, you don't need to wear masks. But we were looking at other European countries thinking, okay, everyone else is wearing masks, we probably need to buy masks to make sure that our employees and colleagues can still work in the stores, or perspex glasses. So we were having conversations to say, are we really going to spend all of this money on equipment that we have no idea, are we going to need this or not? So I think in the role of the CFO, you were making some tough calls in terms of financing decisions. So hopefully they all played out right in the right direction for every organisation. It was a bit of a gamble.
We didn't starve, so I think you must have done something right.
And everyone had toilet paper and pasta, yeah.
Absolutely, but it's fascinating with the different supply chains reorientating themselves, that were going to the restaurants and to those public spaces, which then had to reroute into supplies to home and supermarkets, along with trying to make those predictions on what sort of safety measures need to come through and make those capital investments, and not knowing whether they're going to actually be right or wrong. I suppose, just moving to Emer, you're in the energy consultancy industry, and both the change that's happened in COVID, but also the change in focus from people around concepts like ESG and recent COP21. You must have gone through two massive changes in terms of both the visibility of your industry, but also some of the blockers that have been posed by the challenges of COVID. Again, could I just ask specifically, what you've been doing and where the role of CFO fits in there?
So yeah, it's been really interesting for us. So if anything, so my background was utility scale wind and solar, and I moved into the energy efficiency space, and it was kind of a hard sell. And to me, that's really surprising, because in a wind farm, you've got to develop the land, you've got to get your grid connection, you've got to make sure you've got a purchaser. What we're doing now is all kind of behind the meter. So we're helping anybody who uses a large amount of electricity use less. And that's half the battle. If you're using less, then it's much easier for the wind and the solar to fill that in. But it was a much harder sell. And I think if anything, we kind of think maybe we came too early to the game. The banks and financiers, get the renewable energy, but ours was different. And that has completely changed. So the focus, whatever happened with COVID, I think people were at home, people took a long, hard look at themselves. I think there's been a whole renewed focus on ethical business, if you like, and people are now seeing, whereas we were seen before as the green sandals and the Birkenstock people, and now it's just par for the course that what people need to be doing is decarbonisation. How many times did people hear net zero before COP26? Hardly any. And we were in selling mode, trying to convince people about our model, which is all about it's a rental model. So it's preventing the likes of Lidl, who want to invest in their systems for their suppliers and their customers, not having to invest in something that's kind of non-core. Do you really want to be paying for better fridges or better whatever, when you could be paying for better staff or higher quality or cutting costs? So it's been really interesting. And now, for the first time in the last 6 months, we have people approaching us saying, can you do this for us? And that's really exciting. And people are thinking beyond lighting. So there was a concept out there of lighting as a service. And what we've introduced is a whole bundle. So we will look at anything that reduces somebody's carbon footprint. So it could be chillers, it could be air conditioning, HVAC units, it could be variable speed drives in machinery in a factory. And now is the first time people are actually saying, what can you do for us? And because what's there is, if you are a CFO, you're looking at constant costs and you might be trying to cut. But if something is working, there's always this attitude of if it's not broken, don't fix it. So an organization could have a massive boiler sitting in a basement that's working absolutely fine, but because it's 15 years old, it's using old technology. There has been very little incentive or very little thought about replacing that, despite the fact that you could cut your costs by 50% for running that piece of equipment. And with us, you can do it on a rental model. So the models are out there, the interest is there. And people are looking at risk in a much broader fashion. And in fact, the other thing that's happened, we've all seen in the last 2 or 3 months, is that energy prices have increased. So we have one customer that we're working with at the moment, and their unit price of electricity has gone from 6 cents a unit to 18 cents a unit in 3 months. And they're screaming, what are they going to do? That's a massive cost. And that's a massive hit to imagine the amount of extra sales. They're a low margin business. The amount of extra sales that they have to make to make up for that is just enormous. Whereas, by replacing and getting more energy efficient, that they can address that in a much more sensible way and without having to cut back on customer service or any of those other things that are core. So it's been really interesting, and people are looking at risk in a whole different way. And I think that risk analysis is one of the key things that's coming out around the CFO role at the moment. And we even whether it's looking at employee retention as a key analysis. So, Avril talked about the things that they had to do, and Sarah talked about looking after staff. If you lose your staff, it's much harder to replace somebody in the current environment. You've got the costs of them going, you've got the cost of recruitment, the cost of training somebody up when they're not at full speed, and it's much harder to integrate them into your culture, and much harder to pick up the phone to somebody and say, how do you do that again, than it is if you're sitting beside them. So if you can retain the staff you have, managing that, that's part of risk management. And to me, that's part of a CFO role. It's looking at how can we invest in keeping our staff happy and keeping them trained and challenged and rewarded. And I don't necessarily mean rewarded in cash. I mean rewarded in terms of growth and learning and all of that. And in the past, when things have got bad, the first things that have been cut are training and so on. And I think that's an absolute mistake. So it's great that in this environment, people are thinking in a much more holistic way.
And can I ask, just so you're a founder and CFO, so you're obviously in all aspects of the company, yeah. Right? You don't have a circle around that CFO responsibility. Mm-hmm. Do you foresee in the future needing to detach those responsibilities, or would you maintain that link that you have?
I think some of it will have to be, if you like, delegated to others, but I don't see myself detaching from it at all. I see, the value of branding as part of, it's all about, I think the role of a CFO is much more about value creation than it used to be. And that includes things like branding. It includes things like making sure that the customers that you support are the ones that are creating value for you. So we've done a piece of work around, customer retention, the cost of acquisition. That's the kind of thing that typically maybe somebody who had a more commercial focus would do. But we're looking very much at the value that's created by the interactions that we have with our customer, the branding that we do, the marketing that we do. And I think a CFO has to be part of all of that. If you're going to spot the opportunities, I've been looking at new markets, analysing those. I don't see that leaving the CFO world. I think it's working in partnership with a CEO and a marketing director and a technical director about what can we do, what processes can we add, what products can we add that add value to our customer but don't add risk to us. So for instance, in the energy world, things are constantly evolving. We want to help our customers get the best value, but how do we do that and be at the cutting edge but not the bleeding edge, if you like? We don't want to be taking on products that aren't proven. So yeah. All of that analysis is very much about partnership, and I think that's the key thing. I think it's very much like a team, and the CFO is part of the team. I also think there's a corollary to that, though. I think in order to have the space for that creativity and that added value, you need to know that the stuff in the background that was the traditional CFO role, so the monthly close and the cost management and expenses and all that, is happening tickety-boo, and you can forget about it. And that means partnership as well. That means the other people around the table have to be on board with the fact that there are rules and there are controls, and not try to be getting around them. Because the minute they start to get around them, or the CEO says, oh, don't worry about that procurement thing that Emer put in, somebody else will, I'll sort that out. And the minute they go round, then I'm back to, and my team are back to explaining, you're back to manual intervention, you're back to trying to figure out why something went wrong, you're trying to explain variances. And that all goes out the window, and then you're back to that negative CFO role. So I think you need people on board with the fact that the controls are there for a reason. They need to be on board with that. Stop trying to get around it. If there's a fundamental disagreement, let's agree to change things, but let's stop getting around it, because that manual intervention and those individual items that go wrong are what drains time. And yeah. I think that's a disaster. So they need to be on board as well. So it's a two-way street.
All right. And Sarah, if we think about the work that you're doing, are there any areas of sort of the organization that you would like or see the CFO expanding into? Emer touched on a number of different areas there. There's both the traditional part, which is the finance and the reporting and the controls associated with costs, etc. Are there any areas which you would have ambitions to push into or are already involved in, which you think actually make the role more broadly dependent?
Yeah, I think Emer makes a really good point. I think there's always work to be done, but the challenge is always going to be prioritization. You need to be able to support strategic decision making, but you just need to ensure that all of the traditional gatekeeper responsibilities, the voice of caution piece, and as you say, the monthly close, everything is just happening tickety boo, as you said, Emer, which is an expression I haven't heard in a while. But I think, Cian, the importance is that it's learning what you can spend your time doing. It's learning to prioritize that time. It's understanding that, yes, you can get involved in every part of the business, and that's always very interesting. And you probably have something to add in some way across the functions, but it's being able to try and delegate those responsibilities. It's being able to try and prioritize that stuff. I think that focus is always changing. I think right now, we already talked about a lot of the tech, but I think there's also there's going to be a bit of a focus on HR, on that future of work piece, on retaining your staff. As Emer said, it's not about necessarily cash reward, but ensuring that your staff are rewarded in other ways, be that with training or development or understanding the challenges that they might be facing and learning how to coach them to overcome those challenges, tailoring their role where necessary, and just retaining the staff that you have rather than trying to recruit back in new staff and help them to understand it, because I'm sure we've all experienced onboarding staff in this remote environment, and it's very difficult. Like it works, but it takes an awful lot more work out of the entirety of the team than would otherwise be the case. So again, I think I keep saying we're very lucky in the Oireachtas with our strong people, but we do have a very strong HR function, a really strong HR team. And they're creative and they think about solutions all of the time, and they're interested in, well, how best can we, okay, this staff member might be becoming unhappy. Is there another way that we can utilize that staff member? Is there another area that they might be interested in moving into? Is there another staff member that might be interested in moving into that area? And being creative with those solutions, I think. And I think the CFO, the CFO role, realistically, as I said, you do have something to add potentially to all of the functions. It's just understanding which is the most important place that you can put your energies at any given time, and be that tech, be that sometimes risk. And we have a chief risk officer, so in this role, in this CFO role, I have less input into risk than perhaps I would, but it's still there. You know what I mean? You still need to be understanding financial risks. You still need to be inputting into those. Still need to be identifying those. And sometimes it's just spending the time and being involved with the various committees to understand where those risks might be emerging from, and to engage with your chief risk officer to see how you might be able to assist them in mitigating against some of those risks. I think it's a period of great change. I'm full of I'm trying to think of the word where I'm saying all of the words that are the buzzwords at the moment, the post-COVID world and this period of change. But I think they're buzzwords and they're overused for a really good reason. I think that is the reality of it, is that our HR, our tech, our risk, all of that stuff is increasingly important and will continue to be, and you do need to ensure that all of the traditional finance function is working away in the background. And be that having the best people, the best in class system, that you minimize the amount of manual intervention that's required, that it can just tick along, that that those reports are going to produce themselves at the end of each month, that you can rely on that system and you can rely on those people to do that work. And I think it's a really interesting time. It's challenging, but I think it's a really interesting time to be a CFO just at the moment. I think it's an interesting time to be at management level in any organization, but I personally think that the CFO function in particular is very interesting right now.
Absolutely. And just thinking in your case, Avril, there's your CFO role actually encompasses a large number of other functions that actually are directly aligned to it, which gives an even broader perspective. Maybe you could talk about how that's set up and what it provides line of sight into, just to give people clarity.
Yeah, so I suppose my role is a little bit different to potentially the traditional structure within an organisation. So I look after the typical finance, IT and e-commerce areas, but I also have areas like legal and compliance, standards within our organisation, customer service, and also business development, which will be looking at internal risk and potential for business development, and also that area of project management. So I suppose going back to what Emer and Sarah both said, actually, the classic example is this: okay, what are we going to do on the CSR agenda? In Lidl, we've committed to be carbon neutral by 2025, and we're planning to reduce our emissions by over 45% actually by 2030. But in my role, how do I make that happen for our organisation from where I'm standing? So I suppose what's important for me is when we decided that as an organisation, that my areas of the business, number one, were helping to build those science-based targets so that we could actually commit to something that we could do. Because as Emer mentioned, it's very expensive. We're a low-cost retailer, and any extra expense that we incur, we do not want to pass it on to the customer, because we intend to remain the cheapest supermarket in Ireland. So how do you actually do that? And I think when you have a broader remit as CFO, regardless of whether it's a formal one or an informal one, that's how you can also ensure that that can happen, that you can, maybe achieve something that isn't necessarily part of your core business, which is this, commitment to CSR. However, in our case, for example, it's absolutely what the customer wants. And for me then to be able to help achieve that from my perspective is that I have that really good overview of what's going on in the entire company from a project management perspective. So I also know what other things are going on within the organization and which will we actually prioritize for the next 5 years, so that we stay investing our finances in the areas that really matter, and that you can see that already on a project management level when the projects are coming through in their infancy, that you say, okay, guys, yeah, this is totally aligned with our strategy. Hang on, this isn't. And I think that comes back to that CFO role of being that neutral partner to say, are we still staying aligned to our core strategy that we have decided upon? And is our financial investment and our resources going in the right direction and being pumped into the right areas of the business?
It just, I suppose it makes it that broader and gives visibility as well on what's coming upstream, particularly through that project visibility. It's quite an interesting setup, maybe a bit unique. We're running out of time, unfortunately, but I wanted to try and ask one quick question for the road. It's probably one that could take a half an hour to answer, but looking for maybe 30 seconds on how each of you see the CFO function evolving in the next 12 months. To round out, maybe back to you, Sarah. I'm not giving you too much time to think.
No, me on the spot. I think, in the next 12 months, I think we've all touched on the reality of what the importance is going to be. It is going to be in those areas of HR, of tech development, of understanding the efficiency, of supporting that strategic direction. And I think, they are truisms. They might be commonalities, but they are truisms in that, it really doesn't matter whether you're in the cheapest supermarket in Ireland or whether you're driving energy efficiency or whether you're supporting the parliamentary function. We're all looking for efficiency because the cost of everything has increased so dramatically across the board that in order to try and achieve value for money, we are all going to be looking to try and drive that efficiency forward without any sacrifice on the part of the functions that we're providing.
Efficiencies, right? I'm taking that as my main takeaway. Avril, over to you for 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think definitely echo what's just been said there. Drive the efficiency forward so we can invest in things like the CSR agenda, like investing in our people. I totally agree with the comments about retaining people. But I also think it will be necessary to look back. So I don't think everything that has been implemented in organisations during the COVID pandemic made sense. I think we did it because we had to do it. So even going back to digitalization, did we digitalize for the sake of digitalization? Do we have the best products? Do we have the best collaboration models? We implemented everything so fast, I wouldn't be convinced. So I think there's a big review piece there as well.
That's really interesting. Yeah, go back and check what you did at pace is fit for purpose. Emer, to round us off.
Very little I can add to that. I completely agree with Avril. I'm a huge proponent of the lessons learned piece. And I think the hardest part about that then is remembering to take the piece of paper out the next time round and say, what did we learn? It's very easy to do the lessons learned and say, that's great. And in a year's time, you've forgotten. But when the next problem comes on, you need to take out that piece of paper and say, okay, let's not make the same mistakes again. Very much agree with the others. It's about, I think the people piece, the value creation is really important. So I think the CFO role is evolving even into a kind of a chief strategist role, that's a partner to everybody, and I think that's my key takeaway.
Thank you very much. So efficiency is looking back and evolving into strategy. Thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated, Sarah, Emer, Avril, and I'll hand back now to you, Sarah Freeman.
Thanks, Cian, for moderating what was a fascinating discussion. Thanks also to our panel for their insights and time. I think we all learned a lot about the challenges and opportunities facing CFOs today. And thank you to David Cass for what was a thought-provoking partner address, and also to CA Partners for a wonderful event. The 2021 CFO 100 Index is available to view in full on businessandfinance.com. I hope we'll see you all again soon, and if you'd like to join the online conversation, please use the hashtag CFO100. Thank you and goodbye.